Welcome back everyone, it's Eric from Rare Candy. Here today we are back on the channel taking a look at another Cosmic Eclipse deck profile. And this time it's going to be the new Raichu Nuzzle deck, kind of similar to the old Raichu GX deck that never quite took off, but Cosmic Eclipse is actually giving us a new Raichu, which I'm personally really excited about, that kind of breathes life back into this style of deck. So I've been really excited to actually take a look at this deck. It's been one of my more anticipated like one prize decks to cover on the channel, but this is the same list as well that was also featured in our testing rounds video on the channel. So if you guys want to see how this deck looks in action, I will have a link down below in the description for you to check that out. But anyways, let's hop into this deck and see how it is going to look. So up first we have 4 copies of Pikachu, and we are specifically playing the new Pikachu from Cosmic Eclipse because it has the Nuzzle attack, and that is very relevant as you'll see going throughout this deck profile. There is another Pikachu that is still in format with Nuzzle, but it has 60 HP, so we are opting for the 70 HP one right here instead. But yeah, has Nuzzle, flip a coin of heads, your opponent's active is now paralyzed, and then it does have another attack, Volt Tackle, 2 lightning, and a colorless to 70, and then Pikachu is going to take 10 damage. So hopefully we never have to attack with Pikachu, but it is very relevant that it has the Nuzzle attack. Up next from there, though, we have 4 copies of our main attacker. That is going to be Raichu. So Raichu is going to be a new Stage 1 Pokemon we're getting in Cosmic Eclipse. And much like Pikachu, it has the Nuzzle attack. So just for 1 energy, we flip a coin of heads. They're paralyzed. But more interestingly, our second attack here is going to be for a single lightning energy. I believe the current translation is Powerful Spark. I forget what the attack is called in English just yet. But there's 20 times the amount of lightning energy that we have in play. So this is almost identical to the attack on the old Raichu GX, but this is a little bit better because it's only 1 energy. We only give up 1 prize card in the process. And this is really what the entire deck is going to be based around. We're going to try to swarm energy into play and just try to hit for big numbers with this 1 prize, you know, pretty consistent Stage 1 Pokemon. And so how are we going to get energy in play is the next question. And so from there we have to look at our boy Pachirisu. Pachirisu is a Pokemon, came out back in Ultra Prism, and it did see, you know, a little bit of fringe play with Raichu GX. I think that deck was always like, it had like the pieces to be good, but every time it got the pieces to be good or it got like a boost in some way, it was always still really poorly positioned in the metagame. It never quite took off. But Snuggly Generator was the attack that kind of powered that deck before, and it's going to be the case here. So Snuggly Generator is a super strong attack. For a lightning energy, you search your deck for a lightning energy for each of your Pokemon in play that has the Nuzzle attack and attach a lightning energy to those Pokemon. So for example, if we have a bench full of Nuzzlers, so like 4 Pikachus and a Pachirisu, just as an easy example, we can flood our board with 5 energy. That's basically plus 100 damage on the next turn with Raichu. So if we can get 2 Snuggly Generators off throughout the course of the game, between that and the damage modifiers we play in this deck, we can actually one-shot even tag team Pokemon, which is pretty impressive for just a 1 prize Pokemon like this Raichu. So this is going to be our form of energy acceleration in the deck. But the next question we have to ask is, well, how are we actually going to get Nuzzle Pokemon into play? And that's going to be with the new, or not new, it came out back in Team Up, that's right. The Emolga from Team Up, and it has this ability called Nuzzly Gathering, and it says once during your turn before you attack, you may search your deck for a Pokemon with Nuzzle. So this means not only can we grab Pikachu, we can grab Raichu, we can grab Pachirisu, we can even grab Emolga because it also has the Nuzzle attack. So if we just get 1 Emolga into play turn 1, we can fill our board because we can grab Emolga to grab Emolga, we can use that Emolga to get another Emolga, and so on and so forth. So 1 Emolga sets up your whole deck and gives you some really insane deck thinning options throughout the course of the game, because every turn you can actually thin out additional Nuzzle Pokemon that you don't need as well. So this is the core engine of the deck. If we didn't have Pachirisu, if we didn't have Emolga, I don't think Raichu would be a good card at all. But since that is the case, I think we have something that actually works pretty well here. So that is going to be kind of our main cast of the deck, but we do have some supporting Pokemon here as well. Up first, we have 1 copy of Tapu Koko Prism Star. It's going to be a very important card, especially since we don't have EXP Share or Wishful Baton in the format anymore as well. But of course, we're playing it for that Dance of the Ancients ability, so we can send Tapu Koko to the Lost Zone and get 2 lightning energy from discard to 2 different Pokemon on our bench. So this is basically a plus 40 for turn after a couple of our Pokemon have gone down, and we can get energy back into play with this thing. So pretty straightforward. has a ton of synergy with Raichu. Up next, we have one copy of Mew for that bench barrier ability. This is actually going to be a really important card just because if you're going at something like Pikarom that has Tag Bolt, or the new Reshiram and Zekrom GX that has Crossbreak GX, if they're able to successfully knock out 2 Pokemon at a time, sometimes that can eliminate, you know, maybe 4 energy from play, or even more depending on what they are choosing to knock out. So it's very important to be able to protect our bench with Mew. Also, it's going to protect against Naganadel GX with that Venom Shot attack. I believe that's the name of the attack, I forget. That is also going to be really good at preventing attacks from that. Up next from there, we also have one copy of the new Mimikyu. This is going to be a new card from Cosmic Eclipse, and we are playing it for its Shadow Box ability. So whenever it's in play, the Pokemon GX that are in play that have any damage counters on them can't use their abilities. So the reason we're playing this is because this gives us a way at shutting off Mewtwo Mew, which is kind of a problem for us because they can copy the attack of Espeon Deoxys and pick off multiple Pokemon at a time. So as you guys can tell, spreading decks are going to be something that this Raichu deck really is going to struggle against. Malamar is going to be another one in particular, which you probably just lose no matter what. So being able to shut off Mewtwo and prevent them from using Espeon Deoxys GX attack to take multiple KOs is something I think that's like almost necessary to give yourself a decent matchup against that deck. And then up from there, we have 2 copies of a very odd card. That is going to be 2 copies of Weezing. This is going to be the new Weezing from Cosmic Eclipse. So the reason we are playing it is because it has this ability, if it is discarded with the effect of the new supporter card Roxy, then you get to put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is another way we can buff our damage output a little bit more. And also another benefit to playing Weezings in here, it increases our odds of being able to use Pokemon Communication. And being able to use Pokemon Communication turn 1 to find an Emolga is absolutely huge. So Weezing, you know, not only pushes our damage output up a little bit higher, since we are going to play Roxy, I think, in this deck, regardless if Weezing was a card, but also because it will help us fix some of our math a little bit too. So Weezing has been actually, I think, a super sick card in this deck. Really been liking it a lot. That's going to be the Pokemon line, guys. Going on to our trainer cards, this is going to look really odd, especially our supporter line. We have 4 copies of Looker. This is a card that really never sees much play, but I have to say I'm a really big fan of like hard draw options and not shuffle draw options in this deck. And the reason for that is we are pulling Nuzzle Pokemon out of our deck every turn with Emolga just to deck thin. And if we're playing something like Cynthia or Tate and Liza, Copycat, etc., we are putting those Pokemon back into our deck. And it's just, we're kind of clunking up our deck over and over. So that's why I'm going for Looker here. It's a straight draw option. We don't have to put our Nuzzlers back in deck. We're just drawing and amassing a huge hand with this deck. And so the reason we're playing this over something like How or TV Reporter is because we also have Looker Whistle, which we are actually playing, believe it or not, in this deck as well. So yeah, Looker, the first of our interesting draw options. Up next from there, we have 2 copies of Roxy. This is a new card from Cosmic Eclipse that I'm a huge fan of in this deck. So you discard up to 2 Pokemon, excluding Pokemon GX or EX from your hand, and then draw 3 cards for each one that you discarded in this way. So one thing that's really nice is in the mid game and even the late game, we have a ton of kind of excess Pokemon. Like, we're only probably going to use 1 to 2 Pachirisus in a game. We're only going to have like 2 to 3 Emolgas out in the course of a game. So naturally we have additional copies of these cards that we don't want. So we can always just pull them out at any time and discard them with Roxy. And of course from there we also have the Weezing. We can actually nuzzle out a Pokemon, communication it back into the deck to grab Weezing, discard it with Roxy. So yeah guys, I'm a huge fan of Roxy in this deck. Like I said, I think just straight draw options are going to be the way to go with this in general. And Roxy is just effectively a hard draw 6. You're discarding usually nothing of relative importance in the deck. So yeah, huge fan of this card here in the deck. The next supporter we're going to be playing is 2 copies of Volkner. This is a card I am admittedly going back and forth on. So Volkner, of course, you get search your deck for a lightning energy and also an item card. So I think really what's important with this deck, especially turn 1, is you just want a Pokemon communication or a way to find an Emolga. That's going to be the big thing you just really want with this deck. And so Volkner kind of guarantees us a Pokemon communication. Another reason I like this is because we can actually grab Looker Whistle. So if our hand is dead and this is our only supporter, we can actually use Volkner, grab an energy and a Looker Whistle to grab Lookers for the following turn as well. So this is a card I'm going back and forth on. Another card I think you could try here is actually Underground Expedition. That's another card you don't really see too often, but that is definitely on my list of options. I think Tate and Liza is also an option as well because it gives you the flexibility if you don't start with Pachirisu or Emolga to switch into those Pokemon. So those are some of my thoughts right now. Volkner, it's been hit or miss, but it is also nice in the late game sometimes just to guarantee certain things, like to guarantee an Electro Power or something like that. I do think there is another way you could build around this. You could even go for like a heavy Volkner engine, and I have tried that as well, but I wasn't as big of a fan of it. And by playing a heavy Volkner line, you can play things like Stadium Nav, even U-turn board to guarantee the turn 1 free retreat if you need to. But yeah, right now I'm opting for the lower count of Volkner, but this is, I think, a flexible spot. But I really am a big fan of the other supporters, so maybe you could even cut Volkner to go for like a third Roxy and maybe another draw supporter of some kind. But for now, it's an okay inclusion. I'm going back and forth on what I want this to be, though. And our last support is going to be one copy of Brock's Grit. So I have to say I'm actually a really big fan of Brock's Grit in this deck in particular. I think one of the big downsides to this card in most decks is the fact that it's a supporter. And a lot of times it's hard to shuffle Pokemon back into your deck and find them in the same turn because you can't play something like a Cynthia on the same turn you play Brock's Grit. So Brock's Grit has you shuffle in 6 Pokemon or basic energies from your discard into your deck. But one reason I like this is because we can shuffle in Pokemon and then just use Emolga to grab another Pikachu out of deck immediately if we need to. Also, getting back energy is something that is really important, I think, in this deck. Running out of energy is something that is pretty common, I think, with this deck. So we need some sort of energy recovery options in here. So this and the Coco should be enough to kind of carry us throughout the course of a game. Up next from there, we have 3 copies of Shrine of Punishment. This is a card I think has been kind of declining in play, especially in one-prize decks, in favor of things like Power Plant. But I think Shrine is actually really important because, especially in the mid and to late game, once our Raichu start going down and we start hemorrhaging energy off of our board, we need some ways at modifying our damage output and keeping our Raichus within one-shotting range of tag teams. And Shrine of Punishment is going to do that. And also, thanks to Mimikyu, Shrine plus Mimikyu effectively turns these into power plants that also do damage, which is pretty cool. So yeah, big fan of Shrine here. I think it's really important at keeping our damage output capped out at where it needs to be. So going on from there, guys, we have 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. So Pokemon Communication, very, very good card. One of the only good searching options, admittedly, that we have right now for this deck. But of course, we put a Pokemon from our hand back into our deck and get a different Pokemon out. So we can always search out Pokemon to use with Emolga, which is really nice. Our Pokemon Communications are almost always live, especially because even on the first turn of the game, we play such a large amount of Pokemon. Even if we don't have an Emolga immediately in play, we have high odds of always having a Pokemon in hand to communicate for our first Emolga. So Communication, just really solid. It's really the only good searching option I think that exists for this deck right now. Up next from there, we have 4 copies of Electro Power as well. So we are, I think on average, without any damage modifiers, this deck is usually going to be hitting for around 200 to 220. So between Shrine and Electro Powers, we can actually push those numbers up. And of course, Weezing, can't forget about Weezing. We can push those numbers up to hitting, one-hit knockouts on our opponent's tag team Pokemon. Up next, we have 2 copies of Looker Whistle. So this is really the big reason we are playing this over other draw 3 options, because we get a searcher deck for 2 Looker cards, put them into our hands. So we have a ton of deck thinning in general with this. Between our Emolgas, between Looker Whistle, between Pachirisu, it's very common to search effectively 20-ish, 25-ish cards out of your deck by turn 2 or 3 sometimes. So yeah, the whole reason we are playing this over Looker. And just another thought too on Volkner. I did mention Underground Expedition. One reason for that is because it has synergy with Looker as well. We can, because we're drawing from bottom with Underground Expedition, and Looker also draws from bottom. So that's another reason for the Underground Expedition inclusion I potentially mentioned earlier here in this deck profile. Up next, we have 2 copies of Great Catcher. So Great Catcher, of course, it's that new card from Cosmic Eclipse. You discard 2 cards from your hand, switch your opponent's active with one of their bench, Pokemon GX or EX. So again, this is really nice because even if we don't have much in our hand we want to discard, we can always use Emolga, search out maybe a couple extra copies of Pachirisu to just discard with Great Catcher, throughout the course of a game. So this is a card I actually wouldn't mind even going up to a third copy of, but right now 2 has been kind of the sweet spot I've been finding in a lot of my lists right now, but I would kind of like a third copy as well. So we have that, and then the last trainer card, we have 1 copy of Reset Stamp as well. So we are going to be hemorrhaging prizes in the early portions of the game. On average, we're going to give up 2 prizes, 2 to 3, before we actually get our first attack off, because we want 2 Snugly Generator attacks before we start attacking with Raichu. So Reset Stamp is going to allow us to kind of come back in the mid to late game there. And also, too, we can search this out at any point with Volkner as well. So that's going to be all of our trainer cards, guys. Going on to our energy, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 copies of Lightning Energy. So we do have a lot of energy in this list, but for pretty good reason. Running out of energy, even with 14 energy, is something that does happen, you know, even somewhat frequently with this deck. So I think 14 to 15 is going to be kind of the right count that we want to be going for here. So this is going to be enough energy to ensure that we can always get off 2 Snugly Generators, even when we prize a couple of energies or have some in hand as well. So yeah, guys, that is going to be our attempt here at the Raichu Nuzzle deck. I have to say, this is actually a super fun deck. This has been one of my favorite decks I've been testing from Cosmic Eclipse. One of the most fun, and I think actually one of the most viable in terms of going toe-to-toe with the tag team decks. Don't get me wrong, guys, you're losing to Malamar. I honestly wouldn't even bother trying to tech for it. I do think there's certain things you could attempt to play, like the Dene, that will allow you to snipe 60 on Inkays, since you can search it out with Emolga. So you can try to tech for Malamar, but I think it requires so many deck spots just to turn the matchup from really bad to just kind of bad. I think you just take the L and just make sure you beat all of the tag team decks. And I think you actually can. You know, in the mid game, this deck is actually super, super aggressive. And especially with a lot of decks making the switch over to Great Catcher, you can actually pile on a ton of energy to your bench and keep it safe from things like custom catchers, as I think Great Catcher will replace that in most decks going forward. So I actually am a big fan of this Raichu deck, and I think it has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with most of the GX decks out there. Again, you're going to lose to Malamar, but this deck is just so good against a lot of the GX and tag team decks out there. But yeah, guys, hope you did enjoy this deck profile. Of course, stay tuned to the channel. We have a ton of Cosmic Eclipse coverage coming up over the next several weeks. And if you did enjoy this content, feel free to like and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.